Hey everybody, Gromos here with another War Thunder video, and in today's video I want to take a quick look at the fight in the Mark V Spitfire in the Pacific, as well as a few dogfights in the I-16, so that we have a little bit of turnfighting as well for a change. Now those will be a bit shorter fights this time, and there's a reason for that which I want to explain first. At the moment we sadly still have the battle rating EC mode up, despite all the feedback from the community, and while I'm a big fan of the historical based version of EC mode, I'm not too happy about the battle rating version. I have talked about the reasons often enough. I think EC in the battle rating variety simply amplifies the problems that we already have plaguing the normal queue. With all nations and battle ratings unlocked, the queue times are also often very long and the games you get in are often very empty. And the way things are currently going, I don't see those player numbers increasing to the point where this is no longer the case. This at the moment simply makes creating War Thunder Simulator battle content for me quite time consuming and often tedious, especially at higher ranks. For example, one video I wanted to make this week was with the Japanese flying the Ki-84 Hayate and the J-7W Shinden. I thought that would make for a very interesting video. Well, I wasted an entire evening trying. I only could get into almost empty games, and in 2 hours of trying to get a decent game in the Hayate, I kid you not, I did not manage to find even one single human opponent. Lots and lots of bots though. And things like that just happen a lot with the battle rating based EC, which just makes getting any kind of decent footage within a reasonable amount of time difficult. On top of that, you have the usual problems like every second game I try to play in the Ki-61 Thai, which I also wanted to make a video about. The entire enemy team is nothing but B-25s, again not making for very entertaining matches and generally not producing footage worth showing, and playing on Aurora as the allies you fight nothing but captured Thunderbolts and Yak-1Bs. Again, problems you already have in the normal queue getting magnified. So this is simply the reason why I have, despite having played lots of War Thunder last month, trying to get footage for good videos, there's just not a whole lot I have to show for it. I just want to mention that if you wonder why percentage-wise there's at the moment less War Thunder content, this is the reason. It's not for lack of trying. A pity really, we had the perfect solution 2 months ago with historic EC as well as the normal queue up, something for everybody's liking, full games, and it was great. So of course it was removed, we can't have players having fun now, can we? Well, let's take a look at some fights in the I-16 and then in the Spitfire Mark V. Let's start with the I-16, the Type 24 in this case. Now I picked the I-16 because I wanted to put it up against Zeros. Having the great roll rate of the I-16 versus the great turn rate of the Zero is an interesting matchup and something I always wanted to try. Now sadly I can't bring the I-16 in rank 3 games, and in rank 2 Zeros are not that common and I could not find one, so Hayabusas will have to do. We are in the game on the Kalkin Girl map and flying towards the enemy airbase when I can spot an enemy fighter, a Hayabusa, to my left moving past me. I turn towards the Hayabusa, going after him and hoping to sneak up on the enemy plane to get a shot from behind. However, the Hayabusa sees me coming and is turning into me. We are at a similar energy level as we merge, so this is gonna be a traditional maneuvering fight. My I-16 rolls a bit better, but the Hayabusa isn't bad there either, and he turns a bit better, so I have to use my roll rate to get in an advantageous position. The Hayabusa got its nose around fast and I start to pull up before we merge again to get some lead in turning around the second time. We turn into each other again, and instead of going for a head-on, I roll upside down and pull again to start my turn in the direction the Hayabusa will go before we merge to get a head start in turning around. As we circle, I pull my nose up a bit in a slight high yo-yo to get turned around faster, and as we turn into each other, I again roll on my back and start to turn into the direction the Hayabusa will go after we pass each other, instead of going for a head-on attack. And then again roll to the right to out of the way and turn, and this time I get a shot at the Hayabusa as it passes in front of me, and I get a few hits in. After we pass each other, the Hayabusa pulls up and then comes back down, and I slot in behind the enemy plane as it dives past me again. I think my earlier hits did some damage to the Hayabusa and decreases its maneuverability, and I can stay behind the Hayabusa and fire a few more bursts at the enemy plane. There's also a friendly Yak-1B showing up now, and the damaged Hayabusa decides to make a run for it towards the airbase which is nearby. Now the Hayabusa is a bit faster than my I-16, but not by much, and the Hayabusa is slowed down a bit by the defensive maneuvers it is doing, so I go after it and try to get a few more hits in to maybe take the Hayabusa out before it reaches its airbase. I don't fall behind, but I also can't really close the distance either. And my 4 rifle caliber machine guns are not that effective at anything but point blank range if you don't get a lucky hit or a fire. Especially since the I-16 has a very twitchy nose and no elevator trim, which makes aiming difficult at longer ranges. Eventually though, a faster Mk3 comes in and closes in on the Hayabusa for the finishing blow, and I get out of the way. Now, since things in this fight were going pretty quick at first, I do want to take a look at it in a bit more detail afterwards. But for now, let's see how this fight turns out. Now the Mk3, which is quite a bit faster than my I-16 as well as the Hayabusa, can close in on the Hayabusa and sets it on fire with its machine guns. And I go up to the left and keep an eye on the two to cover the Mk and go after the Hayabusa again should the fire turn out not to be enough for the enemy plane to go down. But it is, and I realize that by now we are pretty close to the enemy airfield, so I start to turn around as I don't want to get too close to it and its AA guns. Looking back for other threats though, I can see another enemy plane coming in from behind, a twin-engine Ki-45. Now the Ki-45 is of course way less maneuverable than my I-16, so as long as you see them coming you can turn out of their way without any problems. So I turn to the left at first and then roll opposite and slot in behind the Ki-45, which starts to make a run for the airfield. I fire a few machine guns rounds after it, but I'm not sure if I hit anything. But now I'm also almost on top of the enemy airfield, and I can't chase the Ki-45 any further, and it is too fast for my I-16 anyway, so I turn around again, getting distance from the airfield. The Mk3 and the Yak-1 go after the Ki-45 and finish it off. I was a bit too slow in getting distance from the airfield though, and I do take a hit from the airfield's AA. Not enough to take the plane out completely, but doing a bit of damage to it. So I want to get out of the AA's range as fast as possible and get back to the airfield to get my fighter repaired. The Yak-1 and Mk3 are also looking like they are vacating the area at the moment. However, as I look back towards where the Mk3 is, I can see some tracer fire from their orange tracers. Apparently there is another enemy plane around. Taking a closer look I can see that there is another Hayabusa going after the Mk3. Now the Mk3 turns, but there's no way it can outturn a Hayabusa, so I come back around to get the Hayabusa off the Mk3's tail. I fire a deflection shot at the Hayabusa as I close in, and I think I got a hit or two. The Yak is also coming back to help the Mk. Now the Hayabusa after its loop is leveling out, and it wants to make a run for the airfield again. This time though, I am at a higher energy state and fast enough to close in on the enemy fighter a bit, and I fire a few more bursts after it from closer range, before I once again have to break off to get away from the airfield AA. I am so close to it now that I duck into the small river valley to get below the enemy AA's fire. Now there's another Hayabusa behind me though, and I have to take some evasive action. And at the same time I want to try to stay low enough to stay below the AAA fire. In a proper Turnfight above the airfield AA, the AA would eventually hit me. Friendly fighters are also still there, so I try to give them a good target using my roll rate to make a harder target myself, but not too tight continuous turns a Yak or Mk can't follow. Sadly, one more enemy plane, a Heinkel 112, which I did not see, opens fire on me, and I take hits from its 20mm cannons, and my fighter eventually finally goes down. So this is it for this sortie in the I-16. This game was over pretty quickly after this engagement as the timer for the game ran out. There were only 3 or 4 players on each side. Now, as I have said, I want to take a closer look at this first engagement versus the Hayabusa and explain my decisions and actions in it in a bit more detail, as I think it is a simple but decent example for gaining an advantage through some geometry and 3-dimensional thinking in a fight like this. So this was the start of the fight. The Hayabusa is pulling up into me and I pull up before we merge, and then we turn into each other again, and here I want to stop it real quick. Now, if you look at the situation, the Hayabusa is coming out of its loop and pulling into us to get a shot, and we are pulling into the Hayabusa. A pretty standard situation, and what many players would do in such a situation is keep pulling into the Hayabusa, trying to go for a head-on attack. Now, there are 2 problems with this in this situation. First of all, in this head-on the Hayabusa can fire as well. Both planes are light planes with light armament, and in a head-on it can go pretty much either way. And I'm not a big fan of letting the roll of the dice decide the outcome of an engagement if I can help it. Also, since the Hayabusa turns slightly better than the I-16-24, he will get his nose on target a little bit faster and gets more likely a longer opportunity to aim and fire. So what I generally do in such a situation with planes that are on a somewhat similar level in maneuverability is I roll around, and instead of trying to get a shot, I start to turn in the direction the Hayabusa will go after it passes me. Pulling down also gets me out of his line of fire, and this way, instead of going for a head-on dice roll, I start my turn before the enemy does, which is still trying to get a shot and coming straight at me, and that gives me a head start in turning around. So we merge, and the Hayabusa passes me again, and we go around again, and as we turn into each other a second time, we have the same situation again. So again, instead of pulling into the Hayabusa in a head-on, I roll around and start to turn around to get a head start. We pass each other again and scissor around and pull into each other again. You can see we get the nose around quicker this time. Now let's stop it again here. We got our nose around pretty fast, but so did the Hayabusa, and the enemy plane is about to get a shot at us if we keep pulling into the Hayabusa. However, if we instead use the incredible roll rate of the I-16 to roll to the right, we can get the upper hand again as we start to turn first, and by now we have enough of an advantage that getting the turn started fast while the Hayabusa flies straight trying to get a shot at us, gets us ahead, and now it's our turn and we get a hit, and the rest is history. Now from the outside a bit slowed down. Now as you can see, we scissor into each other and the Hayabusa almost has the shot, so I roll to the right and start my turn. And since I did so earlier while the Hayabusa was still flying straight, trying to get a shot at me, I am already halfway turned around by the time the Hayabusa passes me and starts his turn. He flies past me and I can then turn around and get a shot as the Hayabusa overshoots. So that's a closer look at this little fight in the I-16 versus the Hayabusa. Now, while this fight was a pretty simple example, I think it was also a good example on how to use the roll rate as well as some foresight to maneuver your plane in such a way as to try to get it lined up with the enemy's flight path instead of trying to just get the pipper pulled directly at the enemy plane all the time, and how this can work to your advantage and to avoid unnecessary head-ons. And I hope this little example is of some help to some. Well, that was a quick look at the I-16. I still want to use it versus Zeros, which was the original plan, but I don't know when I will get the opportunity for this. Well then, the second plane I want to quickly show you a little bit of footage from is the Spitfire MkVb, the British battle ratings 3.3 fighter, and the reason is that I think the Spitfire MkVb, especially in the Pacific scenario versus the Japanese, is giving a lot of people trouble. However, if you want to play the rank 3 matches, you really don't have much choice other than the 5B for your first plane to use. There's only the Sea Hurricane as non-premium option for British single-engine fighters to start with other than the MkVb Spitfire. Now the MkVb Spitfire as well as the MkVc back in the day used to run very unusual and early engine settings, very weak settings, and only produced the same amount of horsepower than the Mark II did, while being a lot heavier. As a result, the plane was simply straight up weaker than the Mark IIb in war thunder. Now this has supposedly been fixed since then. The 5B does now run the engine settings and has the horsepower output that you would expect from a Mark V. Yet I feel the impact on the plane's performance was surprisingly minor, if it was there at all, considering it was missing over 200 horsepower. So I am not sure if the plane is actually performing like it should now or not. But in any case, in comparison with the Mark Is and IIs and the Mark IX after it, the Mark V is the weakest performing Spitfire in war thunder in my opinion, in comparison with its main opposition. The Mark Vb is a little bit faster, not much though, than the 2B in test flight conditions, when you get to fly in a straight line forever and ever. In actual fight, I would not be surprised if the lighter and faster accelerating 2B isn't going faster most of the time. Now, versus Germans, the Spitfire still has its amazing turn rate, but versus the Japanese Zeros and Hayabusas, that won't work out so well. As a matter of fact, I think that the Spitfire's turn rate is getting the plane killed more than anything in the Pacific matchups, as this invites to use its turn rate to turn after opponents and lose speed in the process. In an environment where your primary opponents are Zeros, that is a bad idea, and the Spitfire is not that much faster than a Zero, so once you lose your speed and get caught by a Zero, it is often hard to get enough separation in time to get away. So in the Pacific scenario, the Spitfire needs to be flown very careful, and its turn rate not being used unless there is no other option. At least if you have any plans on surviving your first engagement. Well, let's take a look at a quick example for that. Now here we are at the New Guinea map, and after taking off I took some time to get a little bit of altitude, so that I have some altitude and speed to play with. Now this might surprise some, though I have said the same in my Zero video too, but having this altitude and speed high I consider to be more important to survive here in the Spitfire than I would say in a P-38G Lightning for example, though having an altitude advantage is of course good in any plane. The reason is pretty simple. If you fly in a P-38G or a P-39Q for example, and they are fully upgraded, and I have say just 800 meters to play with, or even less than that, and if I'm not too slow I can use those just 800 meters to point the nose slightly down when I get in a situation I don't like, and outrun pretty much everything the Japanese can throw at me, except the Raiden, pretty quickly. Even Ki-61s, if they don't dive down from altitude, you can outrun quickly in a Lightning for example, even with a smaller amount of altitude to speed up. The Spitfire, like a Zero, though not quite as bad, is not that fast, and outrunning Zeros, especially the clipped wing M3s or Hayabusas in time before you get hit, simply needs more altitude and speed to begin with. Yeah, you can turn better than a P-38, but versus a Zero that will probably not help you all that much. It's a last resort. And that is why in the MkVb on the Pacific map you have to, in my opinion, fly more disciplined despite your good turn rate, unless you want to end up as an easy kill for the first Zero that comes by. So after diving on one Zero and not getting an angle on it to attack and going back up, I'm diving back after a second Zero. I hope I can get in behind the Zero while it is focused on the bowfighter in front of it, but the Zero sees me coming and turns to the left. Now this is exactly the kind of situation where it can be very tempting in a Spitfire to use your turn rate to try to go after the Zero anyway to get a shot. On the P-38 that would not even be a question since it can't turn that tight anyway. But first of all, trying to turn after the Zero at this speed might make your wings fall off, and even if you get the shot at the Zero, turning after it in the Spitfire will waste a lot of speed fast, and you are an easy target for the next Zero, and there are quite a few around here. The Spitfire is pretty heavy in comparison to how well it turns. A P-49G is about the same weight, but it won't turn as well. A Hayabusa turns that well, but is much lighter. Now that means that while the Spitfire can turn very well, it will lose speed pretty fast in a tight turn. In short, the Spitfire lets you turn yourself into a sitting duck very fast if you are not careful. Now I'm just pulling up from my third unsuccessful attack, and this is what can get a bit frustrating. The Spitfire is not a very stable fire platform. In my opinion that is also a little bit of a flight model problem, since the Merlin-powered variants had a reputation of being pretty stable. The Griffin-powered ones were unstable. Anyway, this is where it is easy to run out of patience and try to turn after a target to secure a kill. But again, that will leave you vulnerable to other Zeros, and the Spitfire won't speed up again as fast once you lose your speed, at least not to speeds exceeding those of a Zero by a lot. Now, pulling up from my fourth diving attack, you could see some tracer fire coming up behind me. I had a Zero trying to go after me. Now, he could not even get close to me, but if I had turned more after an earlier opponent, he would have. Now, coming down from my fifth attack, I get an angle on the Raiden, and I finally get my kill. Just in time, as I'm just about out of energy and I don't feel confident that I can outclimb the enemy planes again, so I just keep going straight, using the speed I built up in the dive to get away. As you can see, the Spitfire is not that good at this kind of fighting. You run low on energy pretty quickly. But in a situation with Zeros as your main opposition, including some like the clipped wing M3s, which are not that much slower than you, that's still in my opinion the best option. Now, I could have turned right after the first Zero I was diving on the first time, and maybe I would have gotten the kill, and I would have gotten this kill much sooner, but I don't think I would have survived to get back home afterwards with all those other Zeros around. Now, that is just a quick example I wanted to show. I flew a lot of Zeros and Ki-61s in this battle rating range myself lately, and I always felt the Spitfire MkVb had a very tough time in those matches. And as I've said, I do think the MkVb is the weakest of the Spitfires, so it is not without reason that they have trouble in this matchup. Well, that's a little Spitfire action, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.